We have today, and then on Thursday is the final lecture, right? Yeah. So there's a lot to cover. Today I want to do the Dabloon, the reaction to the whiteness of the whale, question about the sources of meaning and that are found in the book, and something about the different perspectives on Moby Dick. So the first part of the lecture and the last part of the lecture line up, because as you'll see, the first part of the lecture is about this doubloon that Ahab has nailed to the mast, and everybody comes around and gives their own interpretation of it. The last part of the lecture is about all the different interpretations we can find about Moby Dick, the significance of Moby Dick. There's interpretations and rumors about Moby Dick spread all over the book. So it mirrors that same setup in the doubloon chapter, where there's a bunch of interpretations given of this one scene. And of course, if you're following along, you know it mirrors the whole interpretation we've been defending of this text, that the whiteness of the whale represents the dumb blankness full of meaning, according to in Melville's phrase, which means there's a plurality of interpretations, an irreducible plurality of interpretations of reality. All of them are right, but there's no one right one. And that's the metaphor of the white light being blown through the spectrum into blown through the prism into a spectrum of colors. And it's the whiteness also whereby all totalizing monotheistic interpretations cancel each other out. So when we're reading to you this chapter about the doubloon, that's another version of that same story. So all over this book, we've been collecting passages and characters and events that support this general line of thought, that the general view here is that reality is a plurality. And there's no one right interpretation because there's many right interpretations. That's what drives Ahab crazy. That's what Ahab can't stand. It's also what drives Pip crazy in his own way. Pip, as we saw last time, some of you weren't here, but Pip, in the chapter 93 called The Castaway, Pip is this helper on the boat. He falls down into the ocean and has a mystical vision of a coral reef, where a coral reef is this beautiful arrangement that's created at random, without any master plan, by the interaction of a bunch of different little insects and entities. And you stand back from that and you look at this beautiful creation. But it's not the creation created by a god or one author. It's a contingent emergence from a lot of different sources of activity. And that's another metaphor Melville has for reality as a whole. It's not the product of one plan or one decision by any one creator god. It's the contingent of emergence of a lot of different stuff happening. Pip sees that and it blows his mind. And so what he sees then is some version of what we just saw, that reality itself has no ultimate plan. There's no one right interpretation of it. There's many interpretations. And Pip comes back to give his view of that, again in this chapter on the doubloon. So this is chapter 99. And in the Dover edition, it starts on page 344. But it's chapter 99 for the rest of you using other editions. Now you remember back in chapter 36, Ahab had actually nailed the doubloon to the mast. Let me see if I can read it to you real quick. Back on chapter 36, on page 137, Ahab says, "Whosoever raises me a white-headed whale with a wrinkled brow and a crooked jaw, whosoever ye raises me that white-headed whale with 3 holes punctured in his starboard fluke, look you, whosoever of ye raises me that same white whale, he shall have this gold ounce, my boys." So he's then nailed it into the mast, and it kind of stays there as a sort of symbol of their whole journey, but also a symbol of Moby Dick himself. Because whoever sees the mast, or whoever sees the Moby Dick, gets to have the gold doubloon off the mast. But what is this thing? It's an old Spanish coin that has a scene engraved on it or pressed into it. And we get a description of it here on page 345. It's the paragraph that begins, "It so chanced."
Not the same chapter 99.
Yeah, back in chapter 99. It's like the fourth or fifth paragraph into the chapter. So this is Ishmael giving a kind of just description of it. And then we're going to go through and see all the different interpretations that different people on the boat give of it. So it basically, it has these letters on it, República del Ecuador. Oh, it's from Ecuador, Quito. "So this bright coin came from a country planted in the middle of the world and beneath the great equator, and named after it. It had been cast midway up the Andes in the unwinding claim of that knows no autumn." So it has those letters, and then the three summits of Andean mountains, from one a flame, from another a tower, and the third a crowing cock, while arching all over that was a segment of the partitioned zodiac, all signs marked with their usual cabalistics, and the keystone sun entering the word I can't pronounce, point at the Libra. So the point is that he just gives you the description of it. There's a sun, there's three mountaintops. Out of the mountaintop, there's coming a tower. The other one has a bird. The other one has the partitioned zodiac sign. So it's just kind of dense with symbols. Yeah? Say what? Yeah, equinoctial, thank you. This entering the equinoctial point at the Libra. So it's a coin dense with all these symbols. And now everyone comes up and starts examining it. And first we have Ahab. I'm now on page 346, and Ahab starts giving it. It's the 3 lines down. Of course, Ahab sees there everything referring to himself and his crazy mission. He says, "There's something ever egotistical in the mountaintops and towers, and all other grand and lofty things. Look here, 3 peaks as proud as Lucifer. That firm tower, that is Ahab. That volcano, that is Ahab. The courageous, undaunted, victorious fowl, that too is Ahab. All are Ahab. All this round gold, but the image of the rounder globe, which like a magician's glass to each and every man, in turn mirrors back his own mysterious self." So, of course, Ahab, who is obsessed with his own mission and with having some proof that his life has a meaning and a grander scheme of things, he needs to see himself reflected in the world. His chase of the white whale reflects that very urge of his. So he sees, that's his interpretation of reality, basically. He sees it reflected there in the doubloon. Next we see Starbuck. Starbuck, remember, is the more mellow Christian guy on the boat. And he's the next paragraph down. And what does he see? Of course, he sees Christian symbolism. Let me read. He got 3 lines from that second full paragraph. "Let me read. A dark valley between 3 mighty heaven-abiding peaks, that almost seem the Trinity in some faint earthly symbol. So in this vale of death, God girds us round, and over all our gloom, the sun of righteousness still shines a beacon into hope." Blah, blah, blah. He's got symbols of Christianity. But the funny, weird thing that happens at the end of his little reading of it is what he says at the last. "This coin speaks wisely, mildly, truly, but still sadly to me. I will quit it, lest truth shake me falsely." So there's something in it that troubles him, that gives him anxiety, that shakes him. Even though he seems to be trying to read into it the Christian symbolism, at the same time, he seems to know it could mean any number of things. And that seems to reflect an awareness that he has too, that the world can mean any number of things. And his faith is not as certain, as stable as he thought it was. He says, "I will quit it, lest truth shake me falsely." Shake me falsely, I mean, I'm not quite sure exactly how to parse it all, except the general view is that he doesn't want to keep looking at this thing. It's too rich with possible meanings. He doesn't want to get distracted by all these possible meanings. It could shake his faith. The next one we get is Stubb, who is that the guy who's obsessed with astrology, the zodiac?
Yeah, it looks like it mentions like Aries and Taurus and Gemini.
So let's see. It's now the old Mogul, soliloquized Stubb. He goes, I'm about 5-6 lines down on that third full paragraph. In my poor, insignificant opinion, I regard this as a queer. I have seen doubloons before now, and in my voyagings. Doubloons from Spain, Peru, Chile, Bolivia, and so on. Why is this one from Ecuador so wonderful? Let me read it once. And then he starts to say, now that's an old Bowditch of the epitome calls the zodiac. I'll try my hand at raising a meaning out of these queer curvicues here. Skipping around on this other paragraph, 10 more lines down. Signs and wonders, eh? Pity if there's nothing wonderful in signs, and significant in wonders. There's a clue somewhere. By Jove, I have it. Look, you doubloon, your zodiac here is the life of man in one round chapter, and now I'll read it off. So he's trying as hard as he can to find meaning in it. The thing that he seems attracted to the most is the zodiac signs on it. But he's basically seeing signs that confirm his own tendencies to interpret the world in a certain way. He seems to think that the zodiac and astrology gives him some kind of guidance, so that's what he grabs onto in reading it. So there's a sort of happy fatalism about Stubb. Stubb is he seems to be a character Melville and Ishmael like to a certain degree. But he doesn't ever let any of these questions really bother him. He's got his views, he's got his kind of fatalism, that you just got to go out on the boat and do your thing, and you live your life, and that's it. You make the money that you can, and you go home, you go back out on the boat. That's the kind of guy he is. He's attracted to the astrology for some reason, so he sees in the doubloon clues about his own interpretation of life in light of that. Now there's this guy, Flask, who's more of a minor character that seems not to have as much. Melville and Ishmael don't seem to think Flask is as interesting as Stubb or Starbuck. He doesn't see anything. Here he says at the bottom of page 347, the paragraph that begins, I see nothing. I see nothing here but a round thing made of gold. And whoever raises a certain wale, this round thing belongs to him. Though I wonder if there's something deep about that, now that I think about it. He doesn't see I see nothing there should be a sign that could mean something interesting. So I guess I'll just bookmark that for later. I see nothing here but a round thing made of gold, and whoever raises a certain wale, this thing belongs to him. The next one we get is Queequeg. I'm now on page 348. And it's now Stubb. Stubb has been standing around, and Stubb is now narrating the rest of the episode. So he sees Queequeg come up, and this is Stubb saying, there's another rendering now, but still one text. All sorts of men in one kind world, you see. So Stubb is already seeing that you've got one text or one coin, and all these people giving different meanings to it. Here comes Queequeg, all tattooing. Looks like the signs of the zodiac himself. What says the cannibal? As I live, he's comparing notes, looking at his thigh bone, thinks the sun is on his thigh, or in the calf, or in the bowels, I suppose. As the old women talk of surgeons, astronomy, and the back country, and by Jove, he's found something there in the vicinity of his thigh. So Queequeg, who's got all these symbols of his culture tattooed on his body, goes up to compare the symbols of his culture, of his understanding of being, with the symbols that are on the doubloon. So it could be something like he is trying to understand what understanding of being or what interpretation of reality might be there in the doubloon, and seeing if it has any interlocks in any way with the one that he has carved on his body. We're going to talk more about Queequeg's carvings on his tattoos on his body in a little bit. Next we see Pip. So Stubb says there at the bottom of that same paragraph, this way comes Pip, poor boy. Would he had died. He's half horrible to me. Because Pip's kind of gone bonkers. He too has been watching all of these interpreters, myself included. And look now, he comes to read, with that unearthly idiot face. Stand away again and hear him. Hark. So this is what Pip says. I look, you look, he looks, we look, ye look, they look. And then Stubb is standing off to the side, observing this. He says, oh, he's been studying grammar, improving his mind. But what does he say? So Stubb doesn't get it yet. Although the previous sentence Stubb had said of Pip, he's been watching all of these interpreters, myself included. And then Pip comes up, having been watching all the interpreters, and what does he say? I look, you look, he look, we look, ye look, they look. So Stubb makes a joke, he's been studying grammar, but clearly this is a point about interpretation. That everybody who's come up to the doubloon is giving another look to it. They're all lookers at the doubloon. So he says it again. I look, you look, he looks, we look, ye look, they look. So that's Pip then, having observed everybody come up to the doubloon, give interpretations of it. He's seen, which confirms the experience he had of the coral reef, that all the different people have had a different interpretation of the same coin. And now he says some weird phrase that we're going to try to make sense of. And I, you, he, we, ye, and they are all bats. And I'm a crow, especially when I stand atop the pine tree here, the mast where they have the crow's nest. Caw, 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 caw. Ain't I a crow? And where's the scarecrow? There he stands, 2 bones stuck into an old pair of old trousers and 2 poked into the sleeves of an old jacket. He must be talking about Stubb. Okay, so what have we got here? We've got Pip, who has had a mystical vision of reality being a plurality of realities, the coral reef, that has no one interpretation to it. It's the contingent of emergence of accidents. And he has seen that everyone is giving an interpretation of the doubloon. I look, you look, he looks, we look, ye look, they look. And then he says that they're all bats. Now, so this is as good as we can do about the bats and the crow bit. But it's like we're reading into a doubloon right now, trying to find meaning in it. So tell us what you think of this. If you read into the doubloon of Moby Dick, another reading of this sentence, I'll be happy to hear it. But what do we say about crows? What do we say about bats? He says we're all bats. I, you, he, they, we, he, and they are all bats. Bats are supposedly blind, although it's not true because they have echolocation, so that complicates things for me here. But we have this phrasing that bats are blind as a bat. So one thing we could say is that these people are blind as bats because they all think that their interpretation is the only one. And Pip has seen from above, he's been watching from above, the different people give their different interpretations. So he knows that there's this plurality of interpretations of the doubloon, and he knows that the rest of them don't know that. Although Stubb seems to be getting a clue of it, and so does Starbuck, which is why he stopped looking at it. So it could be that they're bats because they're blind, and they don't see that their interpretation is one of many interpretations. Where does echolocation come in? I can't imagine, but who knows? Maybe Melville didn't even know about echolocation when he wrote this book. I just leave that up to you. Why does Pip say, I'm a crow? It's because he has this view from above, and he can look down. He was in the crow's nest, looking down. He has the interpretation that there is many interpretations of the doubloon. He doesn't himself have an interpretation of the doubloon, you notice. He comes up to the doubloon, and he just starts saying whatever that everyone else was giving interpretations of it. So he's a crow insofar as he was in this crow's nest looking down from above. He has a perspective from above, but not his own perspective. That's the weird part. He doesn't have his own perspective on the doubloon, just like he doesn't have his own perspective on reality. He sees that all there is a plurality of perspectives. And that's his take on the doubloon. Now, something similar. Did you have something to say, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I've got a crazy interpretation of the class.
All right.
So,
Good. Flask is the one who says.
Go and see if it works.
Good.
So he says, I see nothing here. Let's say I see no thing. I see no thing here, but a round thing made of gold. So let's just say no thing, because to see a thing requires an interpretation.
Yeah.
So all he's saying is there's just this space where people interpret this space and achieve meaning in that interpretation. So you've got this round thing made of gold, where gold's of value. And round's really interesting. Like, why would it be round?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, how do we calculate, like, the diameter and radius of circles? It's like using pi.
Mm-hmm.
Pi is kind of indeterminate. It keeps going.
Nice.
So, it's a crazy interpretation. And then but then this is really interesting because he goes, it's kind of really it's kind of a nonchalant nihilism in a way. He's goes, and whoever raises a certain whale, that'd be a thing. So whoever has an interpretation, this round thing belongs to him. Okay, that's his interpretation. He has achieved value. So what's all this staring about? So he's like, yeah, so what? This is just the way it is.
Yeah. So that makes him into a sort of matter-of-fact Bulkington insight or something like that. Interesting. I think the Thanksgiving calendar wiped out all the names. Winton. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's funny too, though, because he sees it as like he only sees the ultimate consequences of the coin. That, like, if I catch the whale, the coin goes to me. So, like, not only does he not really care about all these interpretations of the actual like symbols in it, he's more concerned with, like, if I catch the whale, I get to keep the gold. Like,
yeah, and for him, that's what's most important.
Yeah.
That's interesting too. I mean, that adds to the line that he's a pragmatical character, Bulkington-like character. He sees there's no thing here. Who cares what it means? Basically, what matters is that if I can get the gold or not. He doesn't seem to be bothered by that. There's no final meaning in it, and he seems to see it. All right, I don't know. It's one of these passages that's so drenched in possible meanings. It's like a dumb blankness full of meaning. This very passage, but this kind of stuff you can do with this whole book, which is why it's so fun and frustrating. But it's also why it's the book itself is an example of what it's talking about. That's why it's so cool. That's what this passage in particular shows that. Do we do it? So we also say batty is people who are bats are crazy. They're batty. And so maybe that's the sort of blind. I don't know what to do with it. The blindness is like you don't see that your interpretation is one of many. I guess that makes you batty too, but I don't know. Pip is also a bat, he says, but he doesn't have the same blindness. But he is batty. Okay, maybe that makes sense. He has gone batty because he has seen and is unable to withstand the ultimate vision that he's had. Alex.
Could he also be kind of making fun of them for the way that they're like reading into the doubloon?
Yeah.
They all think they're right, and he's like, well, these are represent whatever you say then. Like, you know, I'm a crow and you're all bats. Like, it's just like
nice. Good. Yeah. I like that. Thanks. Theo.
What do you think he means when he asks, "Where is the scarecrow?" Then, if he's saying, "I'm the crow and I understand this pluralistic world," what is he referring to when he mentions the scarecrow?
I don't know. It seems like you got an idea about this,
Maybe
Raphael?
someone that sees it from a broader perspective than Pip. So like if, Pip sees it from like, okay, these guys are just like giving their interpretation, but it's not like they're all true. Then I think I see like all the interpretations, but the scarecrow is like someone that sees even more interpretations or like sees it from a broader perspective than Pip. Maybe that could be it.
Because what's the function of the scarecrow? And well, how would that be keeping Pip away from the doubloon? You got to help us?
Yeah, I mean, it follows then Stubb is like, wonder if he means me, complimentary poor lad. I could go hang myself. Anyway, for the present, I'll quit Pip's vicinity. I can stand the rest, for they have plain wits, but he's too crazy witty for my sanity. So I leave him muttering.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's weird though, because like instead of him scaring away the crow scares him away, because he's like, Pip's
Nice.
talking nonsense. He doesn't have an actual interpretation. Everybody else at least has a story, and I can get on there. Like I can entertain them, but Pip's too much. Like,
Yeah.
So then he backs away.
Good. Yeah, because it looks like he's referring to Stubb when he says there he stands, because Stubb is the one standing on, kind of watching this. So he's referring to Stubb as the scarecrow. Why would Stubb be the scarecrow if the crow is the one who sees that there's only a plurality of interpretations? I'm not sure what to do with it, but I like your point that he has scared away the scarecrow, because Stubb is like, I can't listen to this guy. He also doesn't quite have the strength of mind, so to speak, to take it that there's only this plurality of interpretations. So kind of like Starbuck backed away, he's backing away. He's like, I can't take this, too crazy witty for my sanity, so I leave him muttering. So that point fits in well with what we've got. Well, I feel like I should go on to the next chapter, but that was fun. Where are we? Okay. So I want to do a little bit about a similar little bit. So here we were talking about people's reaction to this coin that could sustain all these different interpretations. And so you're supposed to see the analogy between that coin and reality itself that can also sustain all these different interpretations. At the same time, I keep wanting to say the analogy is also to this book itself that sustained very many interpretations. And now we want to go through and say something about the ways different people have reacted to the whiteness, where the whiteness of the whale, remember, stands for the way totalizing interpretations cancel each other out, because they all can't be true. And if you can withhold from grasping onto totalizing interpretations, you can be receptive to a plurality of local meanings, local interpretations, the whole rainbow that is out there. So that's what we mean under the label of whiteness. It's both the whiteness that's mutual cancellation of totalizing views, and the whiteness that's the dumb blankness full of meaning that contains within it a number of possible interpretations. So there's one reaction to this would be to refuse it, or refuse to even see it, which is Starbuck's basic view. We haven't talked much in detail about Starbuck, so I just want to read you a couple of quotes about him and why his kind of character represents a refusal to see the whiteness. Because he's a stand-in. He's the most traditional stand-in for the keep getting confused. It's monotheology, or say what? Okay. He stands in for the mono view, the mono-Christian view. The most typical mono-Christian view. Ahab is the maniac version of it. Starbuck is the kind of typical middle-of-the-road 19th century Christian. So he's described on page 90 at the end of chapter 1. I'm just going to go through this kind of quickly, but you can write down these references. The end of chapter 21 on page 90, he's described as a good man and pious. On page 99, we read that he's a native of Nantucket. That's the first sentence in chapter 26. Starbuck, a native of Nantucket. And remember that Nantucket, as we were looking at it, Nantucket is the town on the sea that does as much as it can to turn the sea into the land. They're the ones that have all the technology, the whaling technologies, to control and map out and create certainty on the unbounded sea. So the Nantucketer is a kind of person who wants to bring the land to the sea, who doesn't feel comfortable on the sea, but would rather turn it into land itself. So it's not a surprise to describe Starbuck as a native of Nantucket. Let's see, in this one passage, he kind of describes the sea as the land too. Back here on page 390 in chapter 114, 3 paragraphs in on chapter 114, he says, a filial, confident, land-like feeling towards the sea, that he regards it as so much flowery earth. And that means his attitude towards the sea is typical of someone who seeks security and stability and prediction and control. Safety. There's stuff for that over here on page 391, where he says, "Let faith oust fact, let fancy oust memory. I look deep down, and I believe." And above that, he says, "Where lies the final harbor? Whence do we unmoor no more?" To unmoor is to take up your anchor and to go back out into sea. So he's someone that's looking for the final harbor where he can unmoor no more, where he doesn't have to be any longer in the unbounded ocean. So he's somebody that craves security and certainty. That's why he says that's the nature of his faith, according to Melville. Yeah, what's your name? Cindy. I was reading in chapter 114. Towards the beginning and then towards the end. Where lies the final harbor, whence we unmoor no more? That's towards the end. That's only a page chapter. That's a page and a half long. Now let's see. There's one other episode to look at on 157. This is the passage where Ahab has kind of whipped everybody into the mood of his vengeful quest. And even Starbuck, who, as we'll see, thinks this is ridiculous, because he says, when he says, "Vengeance on a dumb brute, Captain Ahab, that's blasphemy." So earlier he says, "This is crazy. You can't take vengeance on a dumb brute." But even so, he ends up caught in Ahab's wake into his mood that he's creating. So here he says at the top of 157, this is at the end of chapter 41, "Morally enfeebled also by the incompetence of mere unaided virtue or right-mindedness in Starbuck." So morally enfeebled, incompetence of mere unaided virtue. That's how Ishmael is describing Starbuck. This is the way all of them are getting pulled into Ahab's quest. And so Ishmael says, "How it was that they were so aboundingly responded to the old man's ire. By what evil magic their souls were possessed, that at times his hate seemed almost theirs." So even Starbuck, who says Moby Dick's a dumb brute, you can't take vengeance on a dumb brute, and he's got this craving for security and land. He can't even stand up to Ahab with that faith and that clinging to security. He's pulled into the monomaniacal quest. And that says something about the way Melville sees Starbuck's version of Christianity related to Ahab's version of Christianity, I think. That the idea that Melville's got is that the monotheistic tradition ends in the monomaniacal quest of Ahab. That's the conclusion of that whole tradition. And Starbuck hasn't reached the final endpoint that Ahab represents, but the Christian tradition itself is leading to that conclusion. And Starbuck, therefore, crumbles in its wake. So, that was to say that Starbuck's version of responding to the whiteness of the whale is couched in terms of his Christian beliefs. He's a kind of middle-of-the-road Presbyterian from Nantucket who clings to religion because he can't stand uncertainty and would be rather be comforted by the religious stories and sense that he has a destiny within this religious interpretation. But in the end, it doesn't do him any good. He falls victim to Ahab's own maniacal version of it, and that's what we get. Sarah?
I was wondering when you first said Starbuck is characterized by refusal to see the whiteness.
Yes.
Because I know we talked about the whiteness as being two things. Like if you look at it all at once, it's like a blinding, inaccessible. Like the one that causes nihilism. But do you mean the whiteness that is the culmination of all the different colors?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. He's unable to see reality as embedding a proliferation, a multiplicity of interpretations, none of which are right, because all of them are right. None of them is the interpretation, because there's so many plausible, livable interpretations that are possible out there. The mono view can't see that. The mono view would only see the whiteness that's the mutual cancellation with other mono views. But he himself can't face up to that. And when he gets a clue of it, when he's looking at the doubloon, that there's a lot of possible interpretations there, he says, I got to stop looking at this thing. So his backing away from the doubloon is another instance of his refusal to face the whiteness as the dumb blankness full of meaning. Jake.
Would you say, I'm trying to put this context into just order of myself. Would you say him backing away from the doubloon is almost like him putting on colored glasses in the sense of Pip didn't refuse to, but didn't have the option to kind of take his off, and he's kind of felt the sunlight coming in, was no, yeah.
That's good. Yeah, he said is Starbuck refusing to see the whiteness and backing up from the doubloon is like the figures that Ishmael describes at one of these passages who wear colored glasses because they refuse to look at reality as having itself no inherent meaning.
And yeah, and also Pip kind of I feel fits in perfect. Yeah, he is one of those people. It's snow everywhere and just
yeah. Yeah, that's actually right there in the next. The willful travelers of Lapland, I still don't know what that means, who refuse to wear colored or coloring glasses upon their eyes. The wretched infidel gazes himself blind. So you're Starbuck's refusal to look at the doubloon puts him in the category of people who put on the colored glasses so they don't have to face the fact that there's a multiplicity of interpretations going on.
And Pip was some little kid that apparently just took it off and just without even having an option really. And,
yeah.
And now, yeah.
Exactly. So Pip sees unfiltered, so to speak, the multiplicity of possible interpretations of reality. That's what it means to not have the colored glasses on, and it wipes him out. To see that there's only perspectives, and not any one single perspective that you can have. It was something that wiped him out. Okay, good. So that was Starbuck. I have something in here about a philosophical interpretation of whiteness but I'm going to skip it to keep going. But if you find anywhere that Melville refers to Plato or Aristotle in the book, and he's always making a kind of side swipe at them. He's making fun of traditional philosophy, because traditional philosophy is in the same game as traditional religion, namely giving totalizing interpretations of reality that tries to fit everything in. And so whenever Melville refers to them, he's joking against them. In Dover edition, he makes fun of Plato on page 280, and he makes fun of Aristotle on page 380. So you can go and check them out for yourself. Another way you could relate to the whiteness is what we were just talking about, which is affirm it, plunge headlong into it, which is the Bulkington relation to it. And we've seen Bulkington a few times. He's back there on page 95, where he's described as, in landlessness alone resides the highest truth, shoreless, indefinite as God. It is better to perish in that howling infinite than to be ingloriously dashed upon the lee, even if that were safety. O Bulkington, bear thee grimly, demigod. So there's the Bulkington view, which is to say, plunge headlong and willfully into it, but it's unsustainable as a way of life. Bulkington's grim, and it's just not something we're capable of. He ends up perishing and going off the boat. This has something to do with your postmodernism question, I think, but we'll have to come back to it, Dominique. I'm going to come back to it tomorrow. Then the other one we saw is Pip, who has gone mad or been wiped out by this total view, this full receptivity to the fact that reality itself is this proliferation of realities or interpretations. None of them add up into one overarching view. The coral insects aren't facing one plan or being guided by one plan. So Pip has that vision, and he's wiped out. Fourthly, you can try to force an answer out of the whiteness. What is this? What does this whiteness mean? And that's Ahab's version of it. Bulkington affirms it, plunges headlong into it. Pip gets wiped out by it. Ahab says, I want to get at what this thing really means for me or to me, and what my significance is in light of it. And I want to strike through the mask, as he says on that one passage that I can't turn to. Yeah. Oh, yeah, please. That's okay. Let me say one last thing. Other than Ahab, it's Ishmael, which is to explore it. You've got the Starbuck version. You've got the Bulkington version. You've got the Pip version. You've got the Ahab version. And you've got the Ishmael version. Those are all of our characters who represent different ways of responding to the whiteness. Okay, that concludes that little subchapter, and now we can change.
It's a question about the claim that you said a little bit earlier about the philosophers like Plato and what they're doing, and how they're doing something similar to what religion is doing. The claim, I guess, is that what Melville and maybe even Homer, they're doing something different.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious. I guess we've talked about how different they are, but there has to be lots of similarities, right? So, for example, if we ask the Melville view, like, do you think there are abstract objects that are like, no, right? So we can just, say, oh, well, according to this philosophical question, you say, no, there are no such things, and then we can just keep going down the hill. So you think that there are this or that, and they can say yes or no, or will he say something like, if we're attuned to this ideology, yes, or we're attuned to this one, no, then you get something like that. Mm-hmm. I'm probably butchering the terminology.
It works.
How spell these things out.
Are you
I'm just curious, what would you say? I mean, so the idea is here, you go to every philosophical question, whether Platonic objects exist, and time, everyone gets philosophy and asks Melville, yes or no about this question. Would he say yes? Would he say no? Would he say maybe? But if he says no, then we can just develop a view. Like, hey, here's your view, and how is yours any different than all the other views? Or why do you think yours isn't holistic like all the other? You gave us answers to all the questions, just different.
the metaphor of whiteness is doing everything it can to get out of the totalizing business, of giving totalizing, closed interpretations of reality. So that means, on some way, he's trying not to play that game, but to explain how it can be overcome. He sees himself as being at the end of that tradition, he's not really the end of the tradition, because he sees the tradition as ending, I think. That the mono views are no longer sustainable, and that we should be looking for alternatives to the mono views. So the whiteness is trying as hard as he can to say, where can we go with what it means to be someone who requires an orientation towards the sacred, namely to an experience that your life, your actions, your identity are being summoned from you by something like moods, or by something like a situation like squeezing the spermaceti, as we talked about last time, that there's experiences out there that draw you into them and that give you meaning, give you flourishing. We all need that. How can we have a relation to that without having the mono-totalizing view? That's the question of the book. So he's trying to get out of philosophy, and trying to get out of metaphysics, and trying to get out of traditional religion. And if you sat him down to give him that quiz to say, okay, do you believe in the distinction between being and becoming? Do you believe in metaphysical identity of objects over time? Traditional philosophical questions. I think he would get up and leave. Or say, like, try to place them in the spectrum of rainbows and say, okay, if you want to do philosophy, take your philosophy and situate it relative to the different possible interpretations that are out there too. You're doing philosophy asking about metaphysics. I'm going to squeeze sperm, and that's going to be my version of getting a local, temporary interpretation of reality. So I think he would try to situate philosophical questions in the spectrum, but wants to deny that what human beings should be doing is coming up with totalizing interpretations that should be valid for all rational creatures all the time. That kind of tradition's ended. So I tried to rephrase your question, but okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. That was my impression that you would get up and leave. That's a good way to put it. But I guess I'm just thinking from the philosopher's perspective.
Uh-huh.
Suppose he's sitting next to Plato, he just gets up and gives it. Okay, you're just not going to know the truth. You're just going to keep looking at the sensible world. You're going to do this. And just like how somebody who's like Melville is like, oh, why isn't he leaving? We should get up and leave. Don't talk this conversation. He's not going to be able to get whatever is out there, whatever we're trying to get at. Or if he's talking to Jesus or something. Jesus is like, hey, I'm the truth, the way, and the life. And the guy just gets up and leaves. Or whatever he does. And you're just a one-way person. And then, he dies. And he's like, oh, crap. He is the one-way life. Then he's just never even engaged in the conversation that allowed him to figure out whether leaving the conversation is a good idea.
Yeah.
But I guess you're saying, well, it has to be a good idea because then we have to understand everybody. That's why it's a good idea, not because whether the world is in fact like that.
Yeah. I think he would say philosophers can do your thing, but don't try to say that's what everybody has to believe, and don't try to give me your logical proof and say every rational being needs to believe this, because you're doing that. I'm going to squish sperm with my friends, or go make music is my version of it, or something like that. Do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, isn't that weird where he doesn't talk to anybody, or if he does come across a totalizing view and react to it in that drastic way? Isn't that itself a pretty totalizing view that Melville has?
So are you saying, is Melville meeting the totalizing view with his own totalizing view? He wants to say, the age of totalizing views is over. And now we need to come up with a different interpretation of reality, whereby there's only interpretations of reality, a multiplicity of them. They don't all add up to any one thing. And there you go. And you're saying, isn't that playing the same game? I don't know. I want to say no. I want to say no, just to the extent that it's not a view that's trying to say everybody needs to do it this way, but it's a view that tries to preserve as much as possible all the different relations to the sacred that human beings can come up with. And it wants to say that's what we are. We're kind of creatures who need a relation to the sacred, who need a relation, an orientation towards significance. And to the extent that there can be many of those, that's what we should preserve. And to the extent that you think you've got the one right answer that cancels all the other ones out, that's what we need to get over. So in a sense, it's playing the same game, but after the other game has ended. Because you can't just say, okay, monotheism has ended, philosophy has ended, let's start from scratch and start up something new. We have to, at the same time, create relations to the sacred that are still within the traditions that are left over, that can be receptive to the traditions that we can still encounter, and we can't just give up, start from scratch. So how do you be a post-monotheist? It's like being post-monotheist rather than a continuation of monotheism is the way to try to save him from just being in the same game. It's related to the thing I was struggling with a few days ago, saying he's got an interpretation that there are many interpretations of reality, and that that's the right interpretation, that there are many interpretations. And I want to say that that's not like a metaphysical claim in the same way that Plato says there's a distinction between the world of appearances and the world of reality. Remember, Plato says all the different material objects that we encounter with our sensory perception, they grow and they change and they go away. But they're all oriented to a ideal reality. All the stupid triangles I draw on the chalkboard every now and then are trying to be like the perfect triangle. That's a metaphysical distinction between being and becoming. Melville's claim that there are only interpretations and reality itself makes available a range of interpretations isn't the same kind of claim, I want to say. I do want to say, though, that it has something similar to it, where it's what I call the primordiality claim. That there is a kind of interpretation of human beings that gets at something very basic about us and can explain the fact that we tend to make interpretations up about reality. That we live in a reality that can, like the Dabloon, can sustain so many different interpretations. And we can't live in reality without giving it an interpretation. And so the whiteness idea, or the idea of the light going through the spectrum, is the sense that the claim that we're the creatures that need to live in the light. That the reality shows up to us in a certain light, and that light is not the same for all creatures across time. The monotheistic view is that there's one right light in which you can see reality. And Melville wants to say, no, it's true that we see reality in a light, under an aspect, in an interpretation, but there's a plethora of them, a multiplicity of them. Don't try to say there's one. I don't know if I'm succeeding at what I'm trying to do, but I want to say he's kind of trying to get out of the game, but after the game has ended. To accept it, to accept what he's doing, you have to accept a big claim that he doesn't argue for. Nietzsche argues for it. We'll talk about it on Thursday a bit. That monotheistic interpretations have ended. They cannot work for us anymore. God, that's what Nietzsche, when Nietzsche says God is dead, that's the same thing as Melville talking about a dumb blankness full of meaning. That the age, the epoch in which human beings have strived to understand ourselves with one overarching interpretation has ended. We can't do it anymore. We shouldn't do it anymore. Melville doesn't argue for it. He kind of takes it, he senses that it's happening. And he's not the only one that sensed that it was happening. Nietzsche, a generation and a half later or so, really argued that it was happening and gave interesting arguments about why Christianity, for example, had to collapse on itself. Melville's writing a novel. He's not doing that. But he's trying to give us a paradigm for what it would mean to live a life out after the death of God, or to live a life after the totalizing interpretations of reality have come to an end. Whew. Any other questions? What's your name again?
My name is Ellen.
Ellen.
I was wondering, so you're saying like no view, like no monotheistic view is compatible with this idea of like the poly view, but I'm kind of confused because isn't Queequeg's view of mono god some sort of like maybe not a Christian god, but like still a totalizing view almost?
Yeah, but what we know about Queequeg is two other things that are important about him, which is that he said, I can learn from these poor Christians. That's the crucial part. So it already means he's evolved or has advanced, or he's post-monotheistic to the extent that he can say, I can learn from these weird Christians. He's post-monotheistic. Metaphorically speaking, he's out at sea too, so he can live in the instability and the uncertainty that traditional religion on this view tries to shield us from. So but you're right to bring up Queequeg. He is the kind of hero next to Ishmael, a different kind of model about what it means to live in a post-monotheistic age. He still has his sacred practices. So there's local sacred practices that are all around us on this world, to the extent that you can maintain them in the sense that you don't have to wipe everyone else out or convert them to your view, that you can actually learn from the other sources of the sacred, then you're post-monotheist. And that's what Queequeg is too. I've got Claire.
So you said that Melville is showing us like how we can live in a reality after the death of the totalizing view. But aren't these totalizing monotheistic views still a part of the rainbow on the spectrum? And we still have to acknowledge that they exist in order to like appreciate the dumb blankness that is the whiteness.
Right.
So how do we reconcile that?
I think it's more a problem for them than it is for us, so to speak. That a totalizing mono view would not want to be reduced to just one other color on the rainbow. So, too bad for them. On this view, we can step back and see them as being part of that overarching spectrum of different interpretations of the sacred. They don't want to be just one interpretation among many. Too bad for them. Is that too easy?
Well, I mean, like, I guess I'm wondering what you mean by their views are dead, because, like, what do you mean by that? Because if they're still part of the rainbow, if they still exist, and characters in the novel are still, still believe in those views, how are they dead? I guess I'm wondering what you mean by that.
Okay, that's a good question. Is your point on this question?
It's a little different. It's about the Nietzsche post.
Let me answer her real quick, and then I'll get you. The traditional mono views aren't dead in the sense that they're become something we just go to learn about in museums. They're obviously all around us still. What's dying about them is their claim that they can be the one and only one right interpretation of things. That part has rotted out. And the rest of those views are trying to stand up still. And the adherents to those views are trying to ignore the fact that they can't actually really believe that they're the one and only one view anymore. They think they can sustain their practices and kind of keep that thought in the back of their mind or try to ignore it. But that's the thing that's shifted. So much, the scientific revolution, the exploration, the colonization of the world, the exploration of the world, European colonizers and dominators encountered all these other cultures that had radically different views. They tried to tell themselves, oh, these guys just never savages. They just never heard of Jesus, so we better give them Jesus. But what happened? They were suddenly everyone started to doubt the things that we believed all along, with the things that we took for granted all along. They might not be true. The encounter with all those other peoples, the encounter with science, telescopes, microscopes, wars. Suddenly you think, crap, maybe it's not right. Maybe the totalizing view isn't what we thought it was. That's what was rotting away. Nietzsche's got other arguments that I tell you about another time. Maybe Otto's going to bring it up, but
Yeah, mine is kind of just about the some vocabulary in this book, and then also it came up again in the Nietzsche reading. He talks about the heading is gay science, and in the book talks a lot about queer and gay. What's the definition in to the definition, because it seems like it's different than other definitions of the noun.
Yeah. I read a passage earlier that they describe something as being queer, which I think just means weird in this context. Yeah. In German, when Nietzsche says the gay science, he means my German accent's really embarrassing, but fröhlich, it means joyful. Oops. I may have spelled that wrong, but it means joyful or happy, cheerful. And that passage that we gave you from Nietzsche, the meaning of our cheerfulness, he's talking about a cheerful relation to the death of God.
So then they also describe Ahab as being the same, so they also describe him as being joyful.
Where do they describe Ahab as?
They say of a bunch of different characters, they're all queer.
But queer means weird.
Oh, weird,
Yeah,
then
weird. It's different
gay
than,
is different.
yeah, totally. Yeah. Queer just means weird. Gay is another word for happy or joyful. Whew. I feel like we got to go on. We only have 15 minutes left, and then we have another class on Thursday. Let me see what do we have to do. I can skip some stuff. I really want to do Queequeg's coffin real quick. I can get through that. Okay, I'll make a plan. I'm going to do Queequeg's coffin. And if we have more time, there's other stuff. Then on Thursday, we're going to do perspectives on Moby Dick and the chase. And that should be enough. Jake, did you have a burning question?
Oh, no,
Okay.
I was just going to add to her point she made about Queequeg. It's really interesting that he's like the most primal and sad. It's like his just two anchors on both sides of the spectrum, which is really interesting as far as him being like the most primal and like savage and like even to primates side of like, and also him being like a postmodern, able to understand like weird.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ishmael, too, has his version of that. Ishmael's raised a Presbyterian Christian, but somehow he's wiggled out of the sense that you have to impose that on other people or think that you've got the only one right view. So there was something bubbling up worldwide when all the different... I'm speculating a little bit here, how did this happen? But when different cultures encountered themselves who were closed off before, and when people started to have to face the fact that what are actually interpretations of reality. There are many interpretations of reality, and some people, it dawned on them that you don't have to impose a totalizing interpretation on others. And Queequeg and Ishmael are representatives of that in this book. So what we want to do, Queequeg. What's really interesting is the coffin. Yeah, where what happens? Queequeg gets sick because the oil casks are leaking or something in the bottom of the ship, and they have to go through and do a lot of gnarly work to repair them and take a bunch of stuff apart. Queequeg falls ill, and he asks for a coffin to be prepared. He tests it out, gets his accoutrement to put in there. Then suddenly he gets up and he says, "Oh, you know what? I'm not ready to die. Never mind," because he said he forgot he had to do something. And I don't know what we're to make of that fully, but except that he has a very graceful relation to death is one thing. He thought, maybe it's my time. I should prepare myself, do my ceremonies, my sacred ceremonies for relating to my death, and be ready to go. But then, I don't know what it is. He doesn't even tell us that he gets up and he says, you know what, I forgot I have something to do, so I'm not going to die anymore. And now I'm just going to carve my coffin. And so instead of dying, he turned his coffin into a kind of chest. And then he spent a lot of the time over the next coming days trying to carve the tattooing on his body into his coffin. Well, here it is on page 383. This is chapter 110. On page 383 in the Dover. At a critical moment, it's a paragraph that begins, "But now that he had." At a critical moment, he had just recalled a little duty ashore, which he was leaving undone, and therefore had changed his mind about dying. He could not die yet, he averred. They asked him then whether to live or die was a matter of his own sovereign will and pleasure. He answered, certainly. In a word, it was Queequeg's conceit that if a man made up his mind to live, mere sickness should not kill him. Nothing but a wale, a gale, or some violent, ungovernable, unintelligent destroyer of that sort. So, skipping down, with a wild whimsiness, he now used his coffin for a sea chest, and emptying into it his canvas bag of clothes, set them in order there. Many spare hours he spent in carving the lid with all manner of grotesque figures and drawings, and it seemed that he was hereby striving in his rude way to copy the parts of his twisted tattooing on his body. And this tattooing had been the work, this is crucial, you need to underline this, this tattooing had been the work of a departed prophet, or seer of his island, who, by these hieroglyphic marks, had written out on his body a complete theory of the heavens and the earth, and a mystical treatise of the art of attaining truth, so that Queequeg, in his own proper person, was a riddle to unfold, a wondrous work in one volume, but whose mysteries not even himself could read, though his own life hard beat against them. These mysteries were therefore destined to end, in the end, to moulder away with that living parchment whereupon they were inscribed, and so be unsolved to the last. Okay, what's important about this is that he has an interpretation, his culture's interpretation of the sacred, tattooed on his body. Or we can say in another way, a more encompassing thing that he has tattooed on his body is a version, a manifestation, an expression of the understanding of being of his culture, to use the Heideggerian phrase we come back to every now and then. We don't. It's not right that it rubs me the wrong way. Let me put it that way. That it's described as a complete theory of heavens and earth. It shouldn't be a theory. A theory is something that claims to express, work out, articulate, and describe everything, and so that you can explain it and control it. So describing it theory seems not hitting the right spot, but whatever. A theory of the heavens and the earth. Melville saves it when he describes that as being mysteries that not even Queequeg could read, mysteries that will be unsolved until the last. So the practices, the orientation towards the sacred and the understanding of being, I see you, are tattooed on his body. The practices of his culture that have made him into this lovable, heroic kind of character that we've been holding up so many times in our conversation here as one of the successful post-monotheists. Those practices of his culture are tattooed on his body. And he is transferring those markings to his coffin. Were you going to say something, Sarah?
Yeah, just checking what chapter.
That's chapter 110. It's called, coincidentally, Queequeg and his coffin. Or Queequeg in his coffin. Joe, yeah.
I might be going on to say this, so feel free to stop me.
Okay.
But it's just, we've spoken a few times about embodying our understanding of this sort of thing.
Totally.
That's what we're talking about now a little bit.
Yeah.
But I wondered whether that might be kind of a bit of a weird description of what's going on. So, because I suppose I think it's not immediately obvious what we mean when we say it's embodied. We're embodying our understanding of being. So what I thought was really helpful, actually, was one of the quotes that you uploaded from Nietzsche, the one on brief habits. I thought that could really help unpack this. So I don't know whether you're sort of going in that direction, or whether it would be helpful to just spend a minute sort of going through what is useful.
I'm game, yeah.
Okay, you're game, cool.
So he's referring to we uploaded a page of quotes from Nietzsche. You all got it? Okay.
Cool.
Go on.
Okay, so brief habits. Habits, this is my little interpretation, so please correct me if I'm going wrong. Habits are like sort of embodied forms of normative practices. So we've got like drinking tea in a certain way, or walking in a certain way. So like in England we've got like really rigid class structures, and so people from different classes or genders would walk in different ways. And that would be a habit, and that's like a normative practice. And remember when we were first introducing the understanding of being, we were saying that they kind of it's sort of underpinned. It's like the foundation for all the practices in our culture. So if all the practices are kind of embodied in us habitually, if there are habits, like the ways we sit, the ways we talk, the intonations, everything about the way that we live our lives, and the way that we think it's appropriate to live our lives in different situations that we can encounter, that's embodied in us. But the quote from Nietzsche kind of really brought out how this point about habits, which is something we all talk about, commonly, is related to this sort of really existentialist kind of conception of having an understanding of being. So in this quote, he talks about how, and actually, just to say, this idea that Queequeg has these tattoos on his body, and that's a way of dramatising this idea, this very real idea that we embody our understanding of being, because the practices are embodied by way of habits. So the tattoos dramatise this very real aspect of ourselves. And so in this quote from Nietzsche, he talks about, I always believe that there is here something that will give me lasting satisfaction. So remember, so actually like we've spoken about today, and actually like we've spoken about, I think since we started Moby Dick, when we were looking at people like Bulkington, we're saying, look, how does he survive? He can't survive. He's in the hurling winds of the infinite or whatever, and he seems to perish, and then someone loses his eyes, like Pip loses his eye. And these aren't survivable ways of living. You can't live without meaning. You need meaning. That's that quote where sort of cuts and we need mending or something.
We're all bashed about the head and need healing or something
Exactly,
like that. Yeah.
So we've got this idea that we're thrust into this situation. We struggle to make sense of it. So we sort of come up with all these interpretations, or we feel saved by interpretations. So when we're living these practices, once we've embodied them, we have a lasting sense of satisfaction. And when you're in them, he says, brief habits too. So notice that they're brief habits, they're only temporary.
Mm-hmm.
Brief habits too have this faith of passion, this faith in eternity. So when we're living it, when we're in it, to us, this is the answer. And so this is this whole kind of, this is why there's kind of a jarring in the debate between someone who's thinks they've got like a totalizing conception, like a kind of Plato character or something. And then when they come up against this existentialist, it's why the existentialist is just going to be like walking away, because they're like, no, you're just lost in your sort of in your house of language or whatever. Your language being the house of being or something. You're running up against the walls of language. You're pressing against the walls of your being, but you don't see that that's only a temporary historical condition. Because when you're in it and living it, to you, it's eternal. It's the answer. You have all the you have total answers to all the questions. And he says about how it nourishes me, so it satisfies your need for meaning. But one day it's time to give up. Anyway, so we can go on. But I just wanted to.
Good. Yeah, there's two things that I'll plop out of that to comment on, and then we'll take it up again on Thursday, because that's giving that passage, the brief habits passage, together with the passage that we gave from Nietzsche to you, long live, or the greatest advantage of polytheism. That's going to be Nietzsche's version of polytheism. And he's got something close to what we've been getting from Melville or Ishmael, who has that sacred experience of seemingly from the outside trivial thing, like that weird activity of squishing the spermaceti, that he found to be so meaningful and so satisfying and fulfilling that you can have a sequence of such experiences in your life that don't have to be tied together under one overarching life plan or religious doctrine. Nietzsche's got a version of that he calls brief habits. Although Nietzsche's version, we're going to argue, is much too willful for the Melville type view that we're trying to pull out of this way. Because what we like about Ishmael, or what Melville likes about Ishmael, is that he can tune into the different moods that are around him in the different situations, but he doesn't get stuck in them. He gets a bad mood. When he's feeling grim about the mouth, it's time to get to sea. He goes to the ocean. When he gets into the maniacal mood of Ahab, he also got the bloody thirst from Ahab, he describes it. I forget the phrase, actually. It's not bloody thirst, but unquenched something or other. And when everyone else gets it, Ishmael gets it too. But he doesn't get stuck in it. The next scene, he's squishing the spermaceti with his shipmates, and he's got a different mood there. So Ishmael is a guy who can be receptive to, attuned to different situations, different moods that draw things out of him, that lead him to do something. He's not going around and imposing and demanding things like Nietzsche's usually suggesting that we do, and like Ahab is definitely suggesting that we do. Queequeg, then, what's important from that is that we did want to say that it's his understanding of being that's symbolized or inscribed on his body and his tattoos and in his coffin. And remember, when we said in Homer, the Homeric understanding of being is articulated in the Odyssey, and the Dante understanding of being is articulated in the Divine Comedy. So understandings of being are something, the shape of our practices and our habits, the way we take for granted what's important and trivial, how to interact with somebody of a certain race, class, or gender are the hot buttons of the understandings of being, where they're very obvious to us. That relating to somebody of a certain gender, you have to have this kind of stand this distance from them, be submissive or be assertive. These sorts of norms of interacting with genders are built into our understanding of being. But we don't know them. We don't go around, we don't get a manual. It gets beaten into us. We get trained into it. We get brought up into it by our parents and our communities. We don't know it like a theory. We embody it. So that's why it's interesting that Queequeg has this understanding of being literally tattooed on his body, so he embodies it. It's not something he knows, just the way we don't know. Like, you couldn't sit down and spell out the norms of interacting with people of the other gender in your body. You don't have a list of rules in your head, although people have made a lot of efforts to spell out what's been wrong with those rules in our culture. This is what feminism has been trying to do since the 1960s. It's not to say we're stuck in it, but typically we don't know it. We embody it. We just do it. That's why Queequeg gets it tattooed on his body, or why it's interesting that Melville puts him in that way. All of that is to say, in this concluding remark, what is it about Queequeg's understanding of being that gets transferred from his tattoos to his coffin that enables Ishmael to avoid drowning at the end of the book? That I leave you with that question. So don't come to class without reading the last several chapters of The Chase. And definitely read the last page, because we're going to spend a lot of time talking about The Chase. And you have to ask your question, why does Queequeg's coffin save Ishmael from drowning?